Brian Keating, who we had a really terrific conversation with a few weeks ago on his podcast, this is his second book that's come out. And he's basically, he's interviewed a number of Nobel laureates on his podcast. And in this, he basically pulls what he sees as some of the prime lessons from many of them. And you're fine. You did it. It's done. So there are a lot of people who aren't watching and can't see that.
No, I have.
It's very hard for me to continue when you look like that.
Post-traumatic podcast disorder, and it is
great.
All right, I'm working on it.
DSM 17 will have that one in it. Hopefully not until then. Okay. What are we doing? This is just a terrific book that I recommend, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm not going to spend time on who the Nobel laureates are, although that seems like it's kind of evading the point of the book. But there's just 5 things that I wanted to mention that we can riff on, just lessons from the book that Dr. Keating points out. So the first one, which is near and dear to both of our hearts, but yours especially, is on tinkering. Keating asks Rainier Weiss, you had developed a trade by the age of 14, working with record players, or as they used to be called, phonographs. And of course, there was an interesting corollary between the microscopic vibrations of a tiny needle on vinyl and the reverberations of space-time. So again, these are excerpts from the podcast that Brian did with these Nobel laureates, that Dr. Keating did with these Nobel laureates. Weiss answers, many who have gone into experimental physics got their experience by being the fixer in the house. They worked in a garage or as an apprentice to a plumber or an electrician. It teaches you how to problem solve. Noise is the thing that kills you. Why did I get interested in electronics? It had to do with the end of the Second World War. By 1944 and 45, so much stuff was coming back as salvage. A friend who ran a junk store on Cortlandt Street in New York, near where the World Trade Center was, told me, we got a nice thing. Just came back from the South Pacific. You'll have to get the varnish off, but there's a whole radar set there. You want the oscilloscope? And it goes on. But to this point, so many people who have made advances in science have been, in a detailed way, in a just totally enmeshed way, utterly immersed in the physical world and in taking apart objects and seeing how they work and seeing if they can get them back together.
Yeah, the thing about tinkering with devices is it's a little bit like biology, and I think I've made the point here before. Biology is very unlike other sciences, right? We group the sciences together because the method you use to sort them out is the same or similar. But the content is very different, right? In chemistry, at least chemistry of the natural world, there's no objective, right? Chemicals don't have an objective. Maybe in biochemistry, you can say there's some objective, but H2O isn't trying to accomplish something. It happens because it's a stable state that arises. Whereas in biology, things don't necessarily make obvious sense. You don't know why the animal does that crazy thing, but that it's doing it for some good reason you can be certain of.
Evolution is what unifies it. I'm gonna absolutely disagree with your first contention that it's about methods, because molecular biology and evolution and ecology use wildly different methods. But in the case of biology, what links it is that there is that evolution applied.
No, I think you misunderstood what I'm saying. The scientific method is the same from physics to biology. Nothing else unites them thematically, physics and biology.
Science writ large, not disciplines, not biology versus chemistry.
Right.
I see.
And so the point is, what is biology like? Mm-hmm. Biology is like engineering, right? Because in both cases, the thing does the thing that it does for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that you can expect there to be a reason. Now, when I dove into that typewriter over there, right?
Was that painful?
Oh my God, that was quite the learning experience.
You said that, and I'm thinking physical space. I'm imagining you did like a swan dive.
It was a metaphor. But the point is, you can look into that thing, and boy, if you get a chance to look into a Selectric sometime, especially one that works, it is mind-boggling what is in there. It totally shocked me. But the point is, you may not be able to sort it out. In fact, you could probably spend a lifetime with a Selectric typewriter if you had no internet and no instruction manuals and never figure out how it actually all works. It's that complex an entity. But you can be damn certain that everything that's in there is in there for a reason, right? And therefore, to the extent that some part of it is failing, you don't have to understand the whole thing to be able to diagnose some subsystem and figure out how to adjust it so that it comes to work. And so this is like the perfect training ground for a mind to do certain kinds of puzzles.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Next quote from this lovely Keating book. Here he's talking to Adam Rice, the stargazer. In 2011, he shared the Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of the accelerating expansion of the universe through observations of distant supernovae. I just read that, and yet actually the quote here I want to read is just Keating talking. He says, In academia, we have what I call the academic Hunger Games. You have to start off in a top-tier school, get good grades, and then impress your professors to get letters of recommendation, go to graduate school, get a good thesis project, publish papers, get first authorship, get a postdoctoral position, get a faculty job, get tenure, and eventually win the Nobel Prize. Well, that's not the end for most people, but do you ever feel like the game is broken? To which Rice says, I think that it's not a great scheme. I am lucky that I did not feel compelled by that scheme. Early on, I decided science was interesting to me and that I would pursue it as long as it was fun and engaging, but that I would not pursue it for checking certain boxes along some path. If people find themselves trying to check boxes, complete a list to get to a certain place, they're probably in the wrong field. Science is a lot of fun if you're driven by your own curiosity and passion. We do it because we want to know answers. Right?
Yes.
Sound familiar?
Well, it's actually, in some ways, it's the perfect non-political analog for what we discuss in our book about the defect of liberalism that comes from a focus on problem solving, right? So the desire to fix things often points to a solution that would correct that problem. And why not build a prize? If you really want to incentivize people to find really important stuff, then what you do is you build a prize that creates, effectively a lottery. You get a lot more value out of giving $1 million to somebody for having succeeded in something great if it causes, 100 people to shoot for that prize. If you divvied that amount up, it wouldn't amount to very much incentive. But once you start doing that, you come up with a corruptible structure where that prize becomes a focus, and then you get all kinds of skullduggery to get there, and you've in fact may have done more harm than good.
I mean, I think that's true, but I think the bigger point, which applies to vastly more orders of magnitude of scientists, is most scientists aren't doing research that would even is applicable to the Nobel Prize. Right? Like there is no Nobel in biology, right? The medicine and physiology prize gets picks up some of that, but most of the work that is done in biology actually is not possibly going to win a Nobel. And across all science, though, at least in the modern weird world, what you have are exactly what Dr. Keating lays out. This just like, okay, you got to get into a good school and get the good grades and then get the good letters of recommendation and get to the right graduate school and have the right mentors and start getting your name on papers. And then you got to do a postdoc and then you get into the right tenure track position. And you got to get your first author on papers and you got to have the lab. You got to start doing other people do the work for you so that you just are the PI, because now your job is getting grants. So you went from doing science to being a money getter. And really, if what you wanted to be doing in your life was making money, you could have gone into any number of other fields where you probably could have made a lot more. And, it's a racket. And it's also a checklist that you sort of, to some degree, you pick up. But also, I remember, I never went to any of them, but I remember there being like workshops and like, here's what you're going to need to do to succeed, if you want to be in academia. And it was just sort of in the air. And it was part of why, both of us at the end of grad school were like, no, thank you. Like not actually what we're interested in. And, ended up at Evergreen because it was so different, because neither of us wanted to play the game the way it was being demanded of us.
Right. But if you zoom out, right, from the modern game and you just say, what are the major innovations that led to science being done in this current way, and you look at, the invention of, or the insistence on these advanced degrees, peer review. And the question is, all right, well, did these things do more good than harm, right? Peer review certainly didn't. For one thing, it has sucked up all the oxygen around the idea of review by peers, right? The idea that peer review and review by peers are actually two unrelated processes, that peer review is somebody's invented solution to a problem that may or may not have even existed, and that it is the way in which power corrupts the system, right? It's not on anybody's mind, because it sounds like, well, what scientist doesn't want their peers reviewing their work? And the answer is no scientist doesn't want their peers reviewing their work. We don't want it done privately and anonymously such that our work is vanished before it ever sees the light of day by our competitors.
Is it possible that peer review is to review by your peers as COVID vaccination is to vaccination?
That's a really interesting question. There is this, and really, you need to hold the definitions of terms with some agnosticism because of exactly this phenomenon. And I don't even know whether or not vaccination is the right term. I'm pretty sure it's not the best term, right?
For what?
For the current COVID vaccines.
Right.
In fact, a good friend of ours has done a good job of convincing me that transfection is actually the correct terminology, that this is a very different phenomenon. And, you're signing up for something that's a lot more involved, right? You're signing up for basically...
That borrows a lot more of your body's machinery.
Right. Now, is it perfectly unique? No. An attenuated viral vaccine has some of the same characteristics. But nonetheless, we really need to have a much richer taxonomy rather than, as you and I have pointed out regularly, just because it comes in a syringe doesn't make it a vaccine. Right. And, just because it's a vaccine doesn't mean it's safe and effective. And what the hell do they mean by safe and effective now? Right. It's as if that term has completely lost its meaning.
Exactly. Okay. Three of 5 here.
Okay.
We got John Mather, whose name I may be mispronouncing, who co-won the Nobel in physics in 2006. Keating asks him, what advice from a mentor has most affected you? And Mather says, to successfully mentor people, give them really hard problems, maybe impossible problems. Don't tell them that they're impossible and let them figure them out. And so I've taken on really hard problems, and they've gradually yielded bit by bit so that we could actually build a COBE, I don't actually know how to pronounce it. It's a COBE satellite, and even the James Webb Space Telescope. So our whole community has been doing this bit by bit, and we've been inching forward to make better equipment to make our measurements that would have been completely imaginary. Give your mentees, give your students difficult problems that may be so difficult that they're actually not solvable. That is extraordinary advice, and actually is so exactly the opposite of what the current educational framework that we're hearing is. You need to be comfortable at all times. You need to be safe. You need to never have your feelings hurt. You need to never feel in any way at risk of failing. And if you are really never at any risk of failing, well, you're really not at any risk of succeeding either. Right, you're guaranteed to just keep on going on, but will never surprise anyone with your insight.
Yeah, I'm somewhat troubled by this one, and I wonder if it's not a clash of biology versus other sciences. Okay. Because
recognize that his example then is one that didn't turn out to be impossible.
Right. I think the point in this may be too much inside baseball, but the point really has to do with why biology is different than other sciences, which is to say, at the point that we discover, for example, that the amount of time that a male northern elephant seal spends submerged exceeds the aerobic dive limit, which should tell us exactly how long they can stay under, nobody says, well, I guess it's a magic creature. It's like, what did we miss in setting up the aerobic dive limit right? How is this possible? This animal is doing something that our model does not say is possible.
The animal existing is proof that the model is flawed.
The model is flawed. And so we all know, if your advisor says, okay, if you're so smart, how does the male northern elephant seal exceed the aerobic dive limit? Right.
Which may, in fact, have been words uttered to you at some point, it sounds like.
Nope. I had nicer mentors than that. But anyway, the point was, look, any mentor who said that is not saying, I know the answer, go find it.
Yep.
They're saying there is an answer and you may well die not knowing it, but it exists.
Yeah.
We know that much. And so, I guess the point is there are problems you can't solve in physics and engineering. And knowing how to recognize them is probably a thing. But because we start with the critter generally and work backwards to how the heck does that function, it's mentorship has to be different, I think.
Yep. That's a good point. Okay. This is just a quote from Feynman with Keating framing it. Keating. Richard Feynman said, "Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts." Meaning, for example, that if Einstein had just trusted Newton, he would never have heard of general relativity. I don't know a scientist who says, oh, so-and-so is such an eminent scientist, I'm just going to believe whatever they say. This may be the most important one for our moment in time, right? No, you don't follow the scientists. No, you don't follow the science. That's not what science is.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but I tweeted something about that ended with science is a method for figuring out how to detect the errors of experts. Rather than, it's obviously not about following the experts. It never has been. And anybody who thinks it has completely lost the plot.
Exactly. All right. One more today. And this is with Barry Barish, who co-won the Nobel in physics again in 2017 for, quote, decisive contributions to the LIGO detector and the observation of gravitational waves.
LIGO detector. I probably mispronounced the earlier acronym, COBE. Actually,
as well. LIGO
detector and lie detector for short.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No?
No.
Okay.
Keating, you left particle physics when you moved over to the LIGO experiment. Was it scary to leave the field you had come of age in? Barish, it was invigorating. Why would it be scary? The only reason things get scary is if you are so comfortable in what you are doing, which probably means you aren't pushing yourself or doing anything very interesting. I've always done different things. And here Keating makes an editorial note. He says, his courage comes through here. This stopped me dead in my tracks. It flipped things around for me to hear that growth is painful sometimes, but also leads to new synergies that can catalyze discoveries. You'll bring to your new endeavors the previous tools developed in different fields. That can be a powerful combination. The freedom of having a beginner's mind combined with the advanced toolkit from decades of prior experience. It's almost welcome to take on challenges like this because on the other side of fear is stagnation or worse. Such challenges are growth opportunities. Seeing them that way is, yes, invigorating. He's helped me develop the mental toughness to lean into these kinds of changes, to go where the fear is. I love this framing of the freedom of having beginner's mind while actually having the advanced toolkit that you can use simultaneously. It's exactly what we both seek and what we were trying to inculcate in our students as well. And what we're trying to get at somehow in the book that we wrote as well.
Yeah, it's a brilliant framing.
Yeah.
And the closest we've come is talking about the value of knowing, I've even said knowing one market really well, right? Maybe you have some passion, right? For me, it might be photography or bicycles. Mm-hmm. And the importance of it is that this is not about intellect, the way that quote is. Mm-hmm. But the point is, if you know one market really well, and so you can watch, the bicycle industry lie about the beauty of carbon fiber frames. And you're like, oh, I get it. You've solved an industry problem and you've decided to advertise it to your consumers as a solution to a problem that they don't even have.
In this case, the industry problem being when people buy a steel frame, they don't need another one anytime soon.
Right. If you buy the right steel frame and you don't crash it, and maybe if you do crash it, it'll still last you a lifetime, And so that results in a sleepy industry.
Yeah, better give them a disposable frame.
Right. What better? This is the solution. You give them a plastic frame. Oh, they're not going to buy a plastic frame. Oh, I know. Carbon fiber. Yes, we'll focus on the carbon fibers and not so much on the plastic resin. And maybe they'll assume it's an upgrade. And maybe, hey, if we get really lucky, they'll leave it in the sun and it will degrade it with the UV rays. And, so that sort of thing. You know one market really well. And then when you're in the market for something you don't know, at least you know what lies sound like. Right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I think this is the same. The expert toolkit in one area, and then you point yourself at some new problem for which you don't have the toolkit, but at least you kind of know what it's like to build up that toolkit, and therefore you'll know what success should feel like.
Yeah, and having beginner's mind, as Keating says, is thrilling. You have to be willing to not be the expert. You have to take some joy in not knowing, and if that doesn't come natively to you, if you can teach yourself to like the sense of actually, I'm not sure yet, and actually enjoy it, not just put up with it, it's, that's the way to expand both your mind and potentially the understanding of other people as well, because that's where you will make discovery.